Resource planning is an area of its own. We work with different resource boards. There is the main resource board found here, which shows a list of the resources grouped into resource groups and what they are planned to work on. We can see here for the current week, the only person we have planned to work on, it's Claire. She's part of a big installation job, 132 hours, that is probably stretching over a long period of time. Yeah, it started somewhere in March and then it goes on. And this is the idea. You plan out what people are working on at a certain point in time, and then we show how much that capacity is and how that aligns. So here we can see Prakash, 40 hours of installation. That aligns very well with him having a 40-hour work week, so everything becomes green. Down here, we're in the red because people don't have anything to do. We reverse coloring and saying the name of the game is to fill the board up with time so people are not sitting idle. This is a graphical view that is interactive, so of course you can move things around, you can replan, you can stretch things out. So if I stretch this over 2 weeks, then of course he's only working half time, meaning he have 4 hours left of time every day of these weeks. But we can see it doesn't count the weekends in this case because it doesn't have any norm time on those days. You can absolutely do it. So let's say we have this and this needs to go over the weekend. You can put it onto the weekend and it will not show right in this case. And you will have to handle that and know that's an exception. I don't think in practice it's that big of a problem. The other option is then you get into a situation where like this, okay, should we count these days when you're over a weekend? No, usually not. Should there be a special case if you're ending on a weekend day or beginning on a weekend day, or it's a simple way? And then I think for most planning, it's manageable. Maybe you split this and say, well, there's some special days. I put a special day on here just to make sure that it looks nice. So I split off 2 days, put them on the weekend, and then, okay, it's very clear this looks good. And then there are 2 days on the weekend as a special case. And I could see here, if I say these 24 hours of work, I want to do them in 2 days, then of course I get a negative of 4 hours because I have 12 hours per day. Or it could be simply because I started stacking work. So this looks good. I put an additional 8 hours on, we're over the top. But of course you can have something where you say, well, actually, this week looks bad. But this is an agreement because it's not supposed to work on Monday because he has to do all this work on and here. And this is where it actually makes a difference how you look at a week, because if I only look at a week and not a period, then the total for that period is always shown out here. When you can see the week is actually, that looks good, even though it is uneven. Let's actually create a new project here, and then we take it from the beginning. So I'll create a project for planning, and I will just use some template. Doesn't matter which template I use. Select a customer and a project manager for this. And then we're good to go. It really depends on where you start planning. Do you plan bottom up, top down? How do you break it down? Where do you start? Do you start from a budget that you then break down? Do you build that up? Here I have my project plan. I might start with creating an overall plan for these different phases. This is my high-level plan. Okay, everything is just set to start at some point. The admin, that's an ongoing task. Design and risk we will do in this period of time. Drainage and water, we will start that after. And we will move that out. This is the time period. Maybe these are connected somehow. And so you can make rules about if I move this, it also moves the next, etc. And so we have to do these in stages, but we can do this at the same time. So these are supposed to be like this. We cannot do the office before we're done the factory, etc. You create this kind of Gantt charting. And this is your outline for the project. This is the planned start date and end date for each of these tasks. Now, this doesn't say anything about how much time we are going to use on it or who is going to use it, but it's a high-level plan. What I can do now is I can go for my budget. And maybe I had my budget before this, but I'll create some budget on this project. And if I have a budget, then that budget can be the basis for my resource planning. So I'll put in some time here and say we need 16 hours here and we need 24 hours here, and maybe we need 32 hours here, and we need 40 hours here, etc. You're budgeting this out. Now I'm budgeting this on a monthly basis, and my plan was, of course, a lot more detailed. I had planned that out weekly, so there's a disconnect between the two, but I'll have to resolve that. So now I have my budget for this, and I can see how many hours I budgeted. I can also see how much I planned, and that is my hours and work assignments, and that says 0 currently. I haven't anything planned out for this. This is where I can bring this into resource planning. And I could do this on a project by project basis, but it's often easier to do it on a high level resource board. And here I can then import my budget and say, I would like to bring in all on my new planning projects, bring that in, and I probably had a filter on my date. So 4 work assignments created, it says. And so we see them down here. Technician, we had our drainage and water street connection. Okay, when can we do that? We have Daniel David. Maybe he can start here. He needs 2 days to do that. Then this, okay, maybe that is for David to do well there. And then I start to put this out, and maybe, well, I'll put it in next week. And so this is now my plan of action. This looks well. That fits with who can do what and so on. So now I have a plan. But how does that track to my overall plan? Well, I would go back, look at my project, open up my Gantt chart, and see that now I have this is my plan time, but the red lines are showing when I plan my resources. I planned everything way too early according to my plan, right? I just put it in as early as possible. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I can move this up to be done earlier, or maybe I need to move in my resource planning. This is the options we have. We're seeing this disalignment, and what do we change? Now there is an option to actually visualize this in the resource board, because here everything looked great. I mean, I just planned it out, but how would I know that this was way too early? If I open this up by double clicking, I can see that both my start and end date, they are marked as red because the task start was on the 26th and the task end was planned to be on the 2nd of May, but I have everything in April. So that's why it shows up like this. If I want this to be visual even here, I can set up coloring rules. And the coloring rules is something where you define a set of coloring rules. I'll define a standard set. And then you define how all these assignments should be colored. And so I'll create one for a special rule for time which is early. I'll create a special rule for time which is late. And I'll set some conditions on it saying if time is too early, what does that mean? That means that the start of the work assignment is before the task start. So if that is the case, then I want to give it a special color. Then I want it to be orange. I want to make a special rule for it being late. That would mean that the end is after the task ends. And I'll make that scarlet. So now I have these rules. And of course, I can make any kind of rule here. If the project has a special word in the text, or if it's a special number of hours or anything. So I could say I have a rule for long tasks. And the rule is that the estimated hours per day in total is more than 40 hours. And if that's the case, I want to color that violet. So I can make any kind of rule. I can have many different sets, so I can switch between the different colorings depending on what I'm looking for in a big plan. And so we see now things are changing around. Actually, all of this is planned too early. But maybe if I move some of this to a later date, now it looks good. Now it's in the green. What happens if I move it a week later? Okay, now it's in the red. Here it's too early. Here it's too late. This is a perfect place for it. And so I can start to move things around. And of course, I can change my views. I can even set up longer timelines. Oh, that's too late. That is perfect. That will probably be hard to fit in. No, that's starting too early, but you get the point. And so, of course, the question is, how much do we need to align with our plan? Does this make sense? How do we do that in a good way? Do we move something out and now it's too late? Now it's too early? This is the big plan for every single project, every single resource. And here I see all work which is planned on all resources. But I could also look at this and say, I want to look at this on a project by project level. Let's see how this aligns now with. And so here now we see that there's better alignment. It's still not perfect, but again, I'm setting a very tight schedule here. So I can decide maybe I need to replan this. Maybe this is the resource planning we get, and we can actually shorten this down a little bit and get this to work. And maybe this is good enough, saying, okay, we're now in alignment. That's always the question. Do you change the plan, or what do you change when things doesn't come out right? Important part here is that we could also look at this on a project by project basis. So now I looked at the big resource board. I can also look at what we call the resource planner. This is a single project view of this, where we don't look at what else is in there. That gives me a structure of the whole project where we can see who's working on what, and we can see out here in May, we have David working his 40 hours of planning. In April, we had Daniel doing something here, David doing something there, and David doing something on this task. So it's by task at a breakdown. So if you like to look at your project with a breakdown by task, then this is a nice view as well. And of course, you can do replanning in here. I can still move things around and do all that. And you can reassign. I mean, if it doesn't have to be Daniel, I can just say, assign this to somebody else. It should be David instead. So I'm moving it to David. There is even an individual resource board that you can get where you can see, this is what I'm planning to work for in the current week. Now I'm logged into Prakash, so by default, you always get your own board. But if you are a resource administrator, you can look at somebody else. You can, of course, also look at a month view and okay, so here we can see what the month looks like for him. Of course, I planned a lot of some weekend work as well, but that is now the monthly plan for David. And if I had capacities, etc., I can see how that tracks with what he has. That can be for a month or week. We can even allow self-planning. That's a part of the setup to allow people to replan. Could David go in, open this up and say, actually, I want to do this work on Monday? Probably not, but as a manager, I can move things around in his calendar. If I only want to look at him and say, well, I can fill in the gaps for him looking at this. Now, we don't show capacities in here currently. That's what the big resource board is for. Everything is a timeline view in that regard. So it is on blocks of time. That doesn't mean that you cannot plan in something with a more specific time. I mean, if I plan Cassie for something and say she should work on this project and client meeting, I mean, I can set that to be 2 hours of time. And currently this just shows as an all-day event. There's no start and end set, but I could definitely say this should be from 8 until 10. This is a tricky part because it's from midnight to midnight. If it's all day, then I have to change the date. Now it's from 8 to 10. If I move it to somebody where there's a connection to the Outlook calendar, I think Prakash's calendar is connected to mine. I'm not sure. We could try it out. I could try to add this to the Outlook calendar. That is not set up. Otherwise, that would simply go into my calendar and show as something on the 8th from 8 to 10 as a calendar appointment. It's only when you click on it. We're looking into a batch process for doing that either scheduled or automatically. It turns out technically it's not complicated, but the business process around what do you do and what do you move around becomes a lot more elaborate because it's easy to say when I create something, I want that to be sent to the calendar. But now if I send it to the calendar, okay, let's replan, let's move it over here. Does that then update his Outlook calendar? And then I move it out and I move it again. And every time I make a change, does that then move that in his calendar and make changes to it? That process around it becomes complicated. Do we want things in people's calendar to just move around? Then there was a question saying, well, could that be invites instead? But I guess in this case, you would then just dragging things around and suddenly created 7 updates to accept in Outlook for these changes. There's some processes around there where it's not that obvious. I think the right way to do it is say, okay, if we turn this on, it has to be that it updates as you do it. And if I'm doing this, that will be 4 updates in the Outlook calendar, and it will move things around in your calendar for you. But then we get to the other side. What happens if I move it in my Outlook calendar? Because we cannot stop people from moving things in the Outlook calendar. Then suddenly they're out of sync. Do we then periodically check what is in the Outlook calendar? I now planned this on to Thursday. You moved it in your calendar to Tuesday. Who wins? Do we then say, no, force it back to Thursday? Or do we say, okay, you probably know better, so we will update the planning here to match what is in there? It's not an easy business process. Technically, not an issue. We can solve that, but it's a business process around it that we are a bit stuck on, and honestly have been for some time, because depending on who you talk to, there are different opinions on what it should be, and that either makes it a huge setup story where you can configure it in 17 different ways, and I'm not a big fan of that. I like more the prescriptive way and saying we have a best practice, this is the way it works, more of the Apple way of doing it. But I'm afraid we end up with something with a lot of configuration to decide what are the rules and when does it do and when does it send it out. Is that on status changes? That's actually one thing to be aware of. That's time zones, because this of course shows in my local time zone. And if I have something that is 8 to 10 here, but then I move to another time zone, then it shows something else. That is one of the issues I'll say we do have. If I have something like this where it's now set as a 8 to 10, then it doesn't matter so much if it moves 1 hour if you're another time zone. If I create something that is set as an all-day event, then unfortunately the way that works is that it sets it from midnight to midnight. If I put that in, that looks perfectly fine in my calendar. But then if I switch time zones to something that is a couple of hours off, then it might end up showing like this in somebody else's calendar, because now it goes across multiple days, because midnight is of course not the same midnight as midnight is somewhere else. That is something we've been trying to solve for quite some time, and it's really hard to solve time zones. Web services that they default back to, we cannot control currently the time zone used in a web service call. Then the back end, when I put this in, I'm in currently at +2 UTC. And so when I put something in like this, it does say here from midnight to midnight, but in reality, it's from 10 p.m. to 10 p.m. So on the server side, it'll put it in as 10 p.m. to 10 p.m. But then, of course, when I look at it, it back calculates. But if I pulled it out with a web service, it would say 10 p.m. to 10 p.m. And this is really a tricky thing to solve. We've looked at adding time zone information in, so you could specify what time zone this is valid for and then try to recalculate, but it just gets so complicated. And I know even Outlook struggled with that for decades to get that time zone information right and getting it consistent. Things do jump around in your calendar if you're switching time zones there as well, but it works reasonably well in Outlook for the all-day events. At least they stick to one day and then they just jump days. They don't suddenly stretch out. It's good to know everything what's behind here. I mean, it is just a table of work assignments with cards and everything. It's standard BC. You can extend it, do all that. We just put a graphical layer on top of it. So there's no magic in some other place. It's straight up Business Central, except that we visualize it in a different way. So you can extend and adjust. There is even a list of work assignments. If you don't want a graphical representation, you can open the list of work assignments. You can work with them this way. We don't allow the import here, and I don't remember why, but there was some reason for it, why we didn't put the import here. And you also see that we don't have the new and we don't have the delete. The reason we don't have the new and the delete is actually not that they are disabled on this page, but the fact that when you open something up here, it opens up the card. And we don't allow you to create new work assignments or delete work assignments on the card, because if we did, you could go and open something up and go and say, I want to create a new one. And you could create multiple new work assignments that were disconnected from where you are in that view. And because we're using the same card, it becomes a thing that if you have a list based on a card, then that list actually is controlled by what the card allows when it comes to deleting and inserting. So I would love to have the new and delete function in here, but technically we cannot do it. It's one of those small things with BC where it limits a kind of what you can do. What I do see some doing is doing a web service to push data in here. Approved vacation from HR, just put in something in here, and then you're creating vacation planning, etc. We looked at this setup of norm time, where we had the different norm times code. I had those in the configuration. They set a number of hours per day. What I didn't mention is, in addition to that, there's also norm time exceptions, where you can say special dates have another norm time. New Year's Day, it's set to 0 hours. So even if it was an 8-hour day, now we reset it to 0 again. This can then be controlled for special resources. Some group of people are celebrating certain observances, etc., or they work in a part of the country where there are special national holidays or celebrations, etc. So you can make these codes also regional. In this region, we have this special observance, or you just make special rules if it's only a few people. That all adds up to a norm time. But in order for us to use that, we need to generate that as capacity. And so for every resource, there is a setup of capacity. There is capacity entry. So we can see Cassie. This is her list. She is part of the plumbers group. On the 15th of August, she had 8 hours of capacity, etc. It's a simple list of capacity. It's very similar to the BC resource capacity. I think the thing is, this was created back in the late 90s before there was the standard BC capacity, so we stuck with our own. There is an action here, which for some reason has, with the new action bar, has ended up under new document, which is called update capacity. I would simply remove the filter from resources, say I want to update capacities from maybe from January 1st to doesn't matter when, some period of time, and then it'll update everything. There's a total update field here. And what that does is say, if you don't put this in, it will only calculate capacities for days where you don't already have a capacity. But if you put in the total update, it will start all over for everybody. And where that makes a difference is if you have created capacities for next year and realized, oh, I forgot some national holidays and put them in. If you don't put the total update, it will say, well, I already calculate capacities for those banking holidays. No need to revisit those, but actually they need to be excluded. So the only way to get rid of something that is already there is to do the total update. And then you just run it and it'll run through all your resources. The question is, do you do it for the next year, to the next 2 years? You have to do it on some regular basis if people are changing norm times, etc. It's not a big thing.